Today I'm showing a really fun and easy way to make interactive greeting cards by making the images hang off the edge. Hey friends, it's Simon Hurley and welcome to another video. I'm so excited to dive into these techniques with you using some of the products from my newest release. And remember, I'll have everything listed and linked down below that I used in today's video, and using those links really helps support me, so I really appreciate it. Now without further ado, let's get into it. Alright, so for this first card, I'm going to be using the Hot Diggity dog stamp set. I love this stamp set and those playful pups that are inside of it. And you're going to want to use the coordinating die set that comes along with this. So before I do any stamping, I'm going to pull out the die set and we'll use this. I'm going to choose the images that I want to use. So I'll grab out a couple of the dogs that I think I want to use in today's card from the die set. Alright, once we've got a couple of the dogs that we want to use, I'm going to start laying them out on my card front and just see how everything nets out. So I'm just going to place these pieces down. Alright, so there's going to be room for probably 2 of the dogs. You want them to be at a similar playing field. You don't want one a bunch higher than the other. Kind of lay them towards the center where you want it to cut out. And then I'm going to grab a little bit of mint tape and I'm going to tape these down into place so they don't shift while we do our die cutting. I love mint tape so much. I find that it's really the only type of kind of non-stick tape where it's not going to rip your cardstock when it goes through a die cutting machine. Alright, then I'll bring in my Platinum 6 machine. I'm going to lay down the card front, and now is where we're going to do some partial die cutting. So I'm going to take my second plate that we're going to cut with. I'm going to sort of slide it through the machine, and I only want to lay it down on the area that I want to cut out. So I'm going to do it about halfway up on those dogs. I'll place down this plate kind of where I want it to start cutting out. And that looks great to me, so anything from this area and above is going to cut out, and then we can run this right through the die cutting machine. All right, then we'll lift these off of the surface, and you'll see that it cut right along that edge, and again, it cut out that top piece. And same thing with this next one. And you can see the mint tape doesn't rip at all, and you can see this just cut out that top area right there. Perfect. All right, now we want to get rid of this top section. So to do that, I've grabbed out a cutting mat here and a nice ruler, and we're just going to line up our ruler all the way across that line, right where that cutting edge starts. And then we'll go in with a little craft knife, and we're just going to go along our ruler and cut in between those areas. So we're going to skip over where the actual dog image is, and then cut right in between those areas again. Super easy to follow along with the ruler and just go in with a craft knife. I'm not super comfortable with the craft knife either, so if I can do this, I'm sure you guys could as well. It's pretty easy. All right, last but not least, I'll just cut the end here. All right, and then we can start peeling this out, and we cut it out really nicely from that top edge, and look at those cute little dogs. I love it. All right, then I'm going to bring this in on my Misty stamping tool so that we can do our stamping and make sure that it's perfect after we've done all that cutting already. So I'll bring back in the stamp set, and we'll pull out that little pug image that we used and this little dog right down here as well. All right, and then it's gonna be pretty easy to just take these images and line them up with those cut areas so there's an even border all the way around that stamped image. And I'm doing this in the Misty so I can kind of look around and make sure it's perfect before we commit to it. And then we'll lift it up with the Misty door so we can do our stamping. And to ink up the stamps, I'm going to use a little bit of VersaFine Clair Nocturne ink, which is this really nice jet black ink. So it's going to give us a really great crisp image. We'll flip that over and stamp it down. All right, and if we need to, if we want to make it a little bit darker, which I do here, I'm going to go back in with that VersaFine Clair again. And this, my friends, is why we did it in our Misty, because if we need to, we can stamp it over again in the exact same spot. So giving it some good pressure again, and that'll just give us even more of a jet black image. That looks perfect, and it's really well aligned on those die cuts. All right, I'll spray this down with some water. I like this pigment ink because it cleans off really easily and doesn't necessarily stain the stamps. And then I love the sentiment that says best friends forever. I think that's such a fun little pun. So I'm just gonna line this up kind of in between those two dogs, pick it up, and then you can kind of align it with the grid on top and make sure it's nice and straight. And then again, I'll stamp it down using a little bit of that VersaFine Clair Nocturne ink. And you can do it twice again just to make sure it's nice and jet black. Now when it comes to using this ink, it is a pigment ink, so it takes a little bit longer to dry. So I always love to throw over a layer of clear heat embossing powder and then heat set this until it's clear and shiny. All right, I love that. It just intensifies the black, it makes it nice and glossy, and it'll also keep me from smudging the ink so it sets it in place really nicely. To color these guys in, I'm gonna go in using some of the Simon Hurley Create inks in some of the more neutral brown and gray colors, and I'm just going to smoosh these down onto my craft sheet to create a palette of color that we can use as watercolors. So this is a really easy way to use the inks in a new way and get more use out of them for coloring, which I really love. And when I do my painting, I like to use a real paintbrush because I find that I can really control how much water I add down to the surface then, which is super helpful because sometimes with a water brush, it just adds far too much water or not enough when you need it. So this makes it really helpful. I always go in with one layer of water to start out with to really prep the surface for whatever color we add. And then I'll go in with my color and start adding it down. I'm starting off with this really light tan color called Cookie Dough. It might be kind of difficult to see on camera, but it just gives the pug a nice light wash of color. And by adding that water down first, it just gives a more even coverage of color across the surface and helps the inks blend rather than just sinking right into the cardstock. To add more depth and dimension, I'm able to go in using a darker color. So here I'm using a little bit of Gur, and I'm just going to paint on that darker color to add some shading and depth to the pug. And to blend that in, I'll just add a little bit more water down, and it's going to help blend everything together nicely. All right, and then same thing for the other one. I'm just going to add a wash of water down before we go in with any of the colors, just to make sure that everything is gonna blend nicely on the surface. And for this one, I'm gonna use a light gray color, so I'm just going in with a little bit of woof all over to make the appearance of a dog with white fur, and gray just kind of gives it lots of depth and dimension to the image. And then I'll add a little bit of darker color to one side and then just again blend that out with a little bit of water, and it gives it quite a bit of depth. For the card base, I've cut down a piece of teal cardstock to 5.5 by 8.5, and I'm gonna make a side folding card. So I'll score it at the 4 1/4 mark using my scoreboard and Teflon bone folder. Then I'll flip it over and we will fold it down. And this is thick cardstock, so we just wanna get a nice crease in there and then score it down. Perfect. And I really like this Teflon bone folder because it doesn't make any shiny marks or anything on your card, and it gives it a really great crisp crease on the card. And then for just a little bit of texture and kind of dimension to the background, I'm gonna be using the Splatter red rubber background stamp, and I'm gonna ink this up using a bit of Clear Skies ink to sort of match the colored cardstock and give a tone on tone effect. So I'll just ink up the background stamp really quickly and easily, and then we'll take my card base and we're just going to press this right in, and I'm gonna use my pressure tool and just apply nice pressure all the way across to make sure that everything transfers onto the surface of my card front. We'll lift this off. I love how this looks. It doesn't distract from the rest of the card because it's that tone-on-tone stamping, but it just gives a nice texture and dimension to add some interest into the background. And then with my Simon Hurley Create inks, I'll just spray a little bit of water down and clean this off with a cloth, and nothing stains, and it cleans off super easily. Now let's add everything together. To do this, I'm gonna use some foam tape. I love this big roll of foam tape. I've already used quite a bit of it, but this is really handy because you save a lot of money in the long run buying this larger roll. So I'll have it linked down below if you wanna check it out. 3M is probably my favorite brand for foam tape because it tears really nice and easily. And so I'll just apply it down to the back of my little card panel here. And then we can rip down even smaller pieces for the back of these dogs to pop them off and make sure that everything has a nice dimension. I will peel off the backing tape. And then to line this up, I'll just stand my card front up and we'll adhere this down to the bottom corner. And it should line up with the rest of the card really super easily, and then we'll add it down. And how cute is that? I absolutely love it. It's so fun and simple, but I love that kind of outlined edge where you can put a different color background right behind it. That die cutting technique is so much fun, and these dogs have such adorable little faces and poses you can use for some really great playful card making projects. Moving on to the next card, I have a really fun and easier way to create this sort of live edge card without doing any fancy die cutting techniques. So here I'm going to use this beautiful watercolor flower stamp set. I love this one because of the amazing technique you could do by creating these hand painted looking flowers with just stamping. So I'll pull out lots of that greenery because that's going to be super helpful to build our little bouquet of florals. And then I'll also grab out one of the watercolor flowers itself to use. All right, I'll add all these images down to my Simon Hurley acrylic blocks. And then let's do our stamping. So I'm gonna start off with the lightest color for the flower. Here I'm going in using a little bit of Shooting Star, which is my super bright, intense yellow color. I love it for doing florals. And then I'll take a little bit of Prom Queen next, and I'm just going to take this ink pad and sort of roll it onto the bottom edge. You can see some of that pink color going onto the stamp. And this is going to create kind of an ombre effect on the stamp and give me some beautiful depth and shading. And then if you need to help blend in between colors, we can go back in with a little bit of that yellow and just lightly tap in some more of that color and stamp this down, giving it some good pressure to make sure all that color transfers. And then we got that beautiful stamped floral with that great blend of colors on the surface. I love the ombre stamping we have. All right, and you know what? I'm gonna do 2 of these. So for the next one, I'm gonna do some Rosy Cheeks, which is this light pink color, kind of the mid-tone pink in my line. And then I'll go in using a little bit of Guppy, and I'm going to use Guppy for the shading on this one. So starting off at the bottom, kind of rolling it up at the top. And to do this, I just use the edge and I kind of lightly roll it onto the surface like this to get that blending. All right, so then I'll stamp that right down onto the surface on my cardstock, again, giving it some time and pressure to transfer onto the surface. And when we lift it off, check out that beautifully stamped image, another great ombre with those florals. I might end up using both of these, but I just wanted another one as backup just in case. All right, for the greenery, this is where it gets super fun and easy. I'm gonna start off by using a little bit of Viper, which is this kind of olivey green mid-tone color. And then to add some shading, I'm gonna use some Fake Plant, which is this dark green, but it's got a little bit more of a blue tint to it. And it just gives a little bit of shading and depth to it because not all greens in nature are the same, so I like to use kind of a variation of them. And we'll stamp that down. And again, this sort of hand-painted detailed look is just beautiful. And I'm gonna do another one just the same way because I like this sort of large greenery, and that's gonna be really helpful in building up my scene. Perfect. For these next 2 leaves, again, to add some variation, I'm just going in using Fake Plant, 1 color, and we'll stamp that down. And then lastly, with this little leaf cluster, I'm gonna do the same thing, going in using a little bit of Viper, and then finishing it off with some Fake Plant, and I'm gonna stamp down a few of these. All right, then I'll grab all the images from the coordinated die set that we're going to use to die cut these out super easily. And then to die cut them out, just grab the die, make sure there's a nice even border all the way around the image. That's super important. And then go in with your mint tape to hold it down while we run it through our die cutting machine. Then I'll run this all through my die cutting machine to cut it out. All right, and then I love how super easy it is to pop out the images once you've done cutting them out, and they've got a really nice white border all the way around them. And like I said, this mint tape doesn't rip your cardstock, which I find is rare because there's so much pressure on it, so you would think it would adhere more, but it does a great job at not ripping anything. All right, so this is sort of where I want everything to be lined up on my top folding card. So I'm gonna bring my stark white card base right into my paper trimmer, and I'm just going to trim off a little bit at the bottom edge, like this. All right, and then we'll use this edge to sort of line things up. So I'm going to bring back in that scene that I created. If you want to, you could take sort of a picture on your iPhone to make sure you know where everything is gonna go. And I'm just gonna go in here and sort of, again, follow that edge to line things up and hide it underneath some of the pieces that we glue down. So you can see that seam is perfectly covered by that leaf. All right, I'll throw this leaf on the other side like this to cover up the other seam. All right, and then for the florals, I'm gonna add them up on some foam tape to pop them up, and I'm just adding it on the top half of the flowers because that's what's going to be sitting on the card. The rest is gonna be kind of hanging off the edge, and then we can sort of take these and line them up right in the center here, hanging over top of that edge, and then place them down. All right, then I'm gonna take some of those other leaves. I like to rip off the stems so that they don't really run into the foam tape too much. And then again, I'll go back in using my liquid glue. I forgot to mention, I'm using the Barely Arts liquid glue. I really like this stuff. I like that fine point nib. It really helps to be able to glue things down and not add too much glue. And it sticks really nicely onto the surface here. So I'll just go in and sort of fill in both sides evenly so they're kind of a mirror image. I'm using a little bit of different leaves in the areas though, to make it not look too similar. All right, and check out how beautiful this card is. I absolutely love it. I love that it wasn't really fussy either with how we die cut it. It's just that straight edge and then a bunch of stamped die cuts that we adhered down into there to create that beautiful bouquet on the fold. Now to finish everything off and kind of even everything out, I'm going to go in with my scissors, or you could use your paper trimmer, and just trim off the excess on either end. This is going to make it so that it fits nicely in the envelope, and it looks really great. All right, you guys, so I'm thinking a neutral paper is gonna look really great inside of here. So I've picked up this mid-tone gray piece of cardstock, and I'm going to do some pattern stamping with it. So I'm gonna go in using a little bit of shady ink, which is a little bit darker than the cardstock that we're using, but I think it'll work really nicely. And I'm going to go in using the Sound Waves background stamp. I think this one is super fun. I love this sort of striped design that we have going throughout the pattern, and it's just going to bring some great texture and dimension to the card that we created. So I'm just going in and inking up this full background stamp. And then once we've got everything inked, we can lay down our cardstock right into that pattern. And then we'll use our pressure tool to apply pressure all the way around and make sure that everything transfers beautifully onto our background stamp. This is probably my favorite way to stamp with background stamps. You could put it in your MISTI as well, but I find that applying pressure down from the top and stamping it into the background stamp gives me a really great image like this one here. And again, I just love that pattern and texture that we have going throughout here. It's just beautiful with that Sound Waves background stamp. All right, so to adhere this down to the inside of the card, I'm just going in using a little bit of my favorite Thermo Web tape runner. I'll add it down to the top corner, I'll line it up with the edge, and that should line it up across with the top. And then we'll adhere it all down. All right, I love how this looks. It really adds lots of contrast to the card with this really bright white on the top and the dark gray pattern on the bottom using that Sound Wave stamp. It's one of my favorite things to do with these split card designs is really add tons of contrast. So now let's finish it off really nicely with the sentiment. I'm gonna go in with that same stamp set. I think this is one of my faves, especially all of the really great sentiments that are inside of here. And we never have enough thank you cards, and I really love the size and font of that one. So I'll pull it out here, and then I'm gonna kind of tuck it in between these flowers a little bit and make sure that it's nice and centered. The great thing about this font is it doesn't necessarily need to be straight because it's kind of angled, so you don't need to be too perfect with it, which I like. And I'm actually gonna stamp this down in that same shady color, and this is great that we're stamping in our MISTI because I can make it as dark as I want to. So I'm just going to go in, stamp this down, and there it is with just one stamping, but I wanna keep going just to make sure it's nice and crisp. I love my MISTI stamping tool for this because I can make it super crisp and dark just by stamping it a couple of times in the same spot. And it just layers up that ink to create a beautiful stamped sentiment. And that, my friends, is the power of the MISTI stamping tool. All right, friends, here is a closer look at that finished card. I love how it looks. Again, that contrast is so strong and beautiful with that pattern on the inside of the card. And I love how simple it was to create this beautiful bouquet just using a bunch of die cuts on the edge of my top folding card. And I love the font of that thank you. And there's also nothing better than just having lots of thank you cards in your stash because I go through these quite a bit. All right, lastly, we're gonna attempt this technique with that sort of live edge, but I'm gonna show you how to do it without dies and do it at kind of an angle for a fun and playful look. To do this, I'm gonna use the Zesty stamp set. This one has been one of my favorites lately. I love this huge lemon branch up here, as well as all of the different lemon images you can use to create backgrounds and focal points throughout the stamp set. I'm gonna pull out that large lemon branch stamp that we're going to use on today's card, pick it up with my large acrylic block, and for this, I'm gonna stamp it directly onto the card. So I've got a top folding stark white card base that we're going to be working directly on. And I'm gonna ink up the image using a little bit of VersaFine Clair jet black ink to get that nice, crisp, stamped image. And we'll stamp it down on kind of an angle on our card here. So starting with the branch here and going kind of towards that upward angle on our card project. And then you wanna give it some good pressure to make sure this whole image transfers to our surface. All right, and then we lift it off. Check out that beautifully stamped impression. I absolutely love this image and all of the great details in it. Then again, I'll go in with my clear heat embossing powder and throw it right over the top. And then we'll heat set this until it's clear and shiny to set the ink in place before we move on. All right, then I'm gonna bring in the Clearly Amazing matte. This is from Scrapper.com, and it's a really nice sticky matte. So it's going to hold down our cardstock as we do our stenciling. So I'm just going to lay this right down onto the sticky matte. And this is making it so that it doesn't really lift off because it's a little bit warped from doing our heat embossing. And then I'll bring in the lemon branch layering stencil set, and I'm going to use this to color in those lemon images. So I'll pull out both of the stencils. So I'm gonna bring in the leaf stencil. I'm going to lay the large leaves over top of the image again, place them down, and then we can place the rest into that sticky mat to sort of hold it down in place while we do our stenciling. I'm starting off using a little bit of Later Gator, and I'm going in using these Altenew little detail blending brushes. I really like these for smaller details or layering stencils, that way you don't have to mask anything off to avoid going over the edge or anything like that. And it just applies a really great blend of color down onto the surface. And then we'll lift that off and we got our leaves really easily colored in. And then for the second layer, it's on the bottom of the stencil here. So we're just going to shift it up. There's no rotating or anything, just shift it up a little bit. And the halves will line up with the halves of these leaves to just add a little bit more depth and dimension. So stick it down to our mat. And then I'll use that same green blending tool. We use one for each color family. So I've got one dedicated to all the different green inks that I have. And I'm just going to go in using a darker green color. So here I'm using Fake Plant. And I'm going to blend this in to add some shading to the leaves. And then when we lift this off, check that shading out. It's got some great dimension going on in the image super easily with just the stencil. Then I'll go in with the second stencil here. I'm going to use the opening with the branch on it, lay that down, and then place it right down into our sticky mat to make sure that it holds it down in place. And then I'll go in using a little bit of Gur ink and a blending tool that I have dedicated to brown. And I'm going to go right in and blend this over top to color the branch in super quickly and easily. I love how easy these stencils make coloring in images super fast, and it gets all of the amazing details. Last but not least, I'll go in with the lemon area of the stencil. We're going to lay this right over top of the image to make sure that it lines up really nice and easily, and then again, stick it down into the mat. And then I'm going to use my yellow blending brush and go into Shooting Star to help blend these out. And with these, I like to start at the top of the lemon where it would be the darkest, and then blend it down to the bottom where I want it to be the lightest. So that just gives a little bit of shading. And again, these little blending brushes are super helpful because you're able to really control how much ink you add and exactly where you add it in on the image, which I find to be so helpful. So starting at the top and then blending it downward where it's a little bit lighter. All right, then I'm going to lift this off the surface, and there we have a really easily colored in image with those lemons. I love how that looks, and the lemon branch stencil to go along with that stamp set works perfectly together. All right, then to create the live edge on this card, I'm going in with my Fiskars Spring Assist scissors, and I'm going to cut around these lemons, leaving a bit of a white border all the way around them. So if you don't have dies for the image, this is what you'll have to do without it. It's totally fine, it's just as easy. I really do recommend these Spring Assist scissors though, because they spring back out at you so your hands don't get tired while you're fussy cutting. And I find that not having to do that motion helps get a little bit of a smoother line all the way across the image as you're cutting these out. Then to create some pattern on the inside here, instead of just using a piece of cardstock, I'm going to go in, fold this open, and I'm going to use my inks to blend some color onto the surface. I'm gonna grab my little ink stand here so I can just use one hand to ink this up. I'm starting off using a little bit of bee sting, and I'm gonna use these Altenew blending brushes. These are the larger blending brushes, which I really like because they cover a lot of surface area at once. So I'm just gonna go in and start by applying color down to one side of the card. I also like blending brushes because you can start with a much softer color like we are here and sort of build it up as you go along, rather than having a really intense color right away. And then I'll sort of fade this up into white on my card base. And then next I'm gonna go in using Guppy, which is this nice orange color. I'll go in using my orange blending brush. And then again, we'll blend from the opposite side using this beautiful, bright, and rich orange color. And just make sure to overlap it in the center. I love how these two colors blend together. My dye inks are absolutely beautifully, and they blend so smooth together. So check out that beautiful color it creates in between. All right, and then we'll lift this off of our inkstand. I love these for one-handed ink application. All right, I just wanna add a little bit of texture and pattern to this. So we can either add that same color over top for darker polka dots on top, or we can use some water to lift some of that color off. And that's what I'm gonna do here. So I'm just gonna go in using a little bit of water. We don't wanna apply too much to make it warp, but that just adds some really great texture down. It's gonna start lifting off that color. And as it lifts, it's going to react. You see it beautifully reacting there with the ink. and it creates this amazing texture. And once that's dry, check out that beautiful background on the inside that we created. I love that ink blended look where it fades upwards, and then that gorgeous texture from lifting the ink off with water. To finish this card off with a sentiment, you guys guessed it, we're going in with the Misty stamping tool just to make sure that we don't ruin anything. So we'll place that down in the corner. And then I'm gonna use a sentiment that says, have a zesty birthday. This is perfect for any friends that have summer birthdays, and I'm going to nest it into this area that the branch left. We'll use that grid to make sure that it's perfectly centered and aligned. Lift it up, and then I'll stamp this down using a little bit of VersaFine Clear Nocturne ink to get that really crisp and jet black impression. Stamp it down. And then if we need to, we can go again. This is why I love the Misty, guys, because it wasn't perfect the first time, and so that really helps to restamp it. And there is that finished card. I love this design where that cut is kind of on an angle like this, and then we didn't have to use any dies to cut it out. Just by adding some fussy cutting and cutting across the surface made a really great fun fold card. And then again, I love that background, that color fade when you open it up with all of that amazing texture. This card is so fun and playful, and it's perfect for summer. Alright you guys, I hope you really enjoyed today's video and seeing a couple different ways to create some beautiful fun fold cards. If you enjoyed it, give it a big thumbs up and leave me a comment down below letting me know which card was your favorite. Also down there is a full supplies list to everything that I used, and using those links helps support me, so I really appreciate it. Thank you so much for stopping by, and I'll see you guys soon. Have a great day. Bye!